Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. I am intentionally encouraged when I see people doing business the right way. And for the last 15 years, Damon Burton and his team at SEO National have done just that. Now you might say, Brian, what can they do for me and my business? I'm going to tell you what they can do for you. They can help you understand search engine optimization. There are a lot of players out there in the marketplace, but you want a team of people that are going to be dedicated to working with you and helping you to understand search engine optimization and how you can show up higher on search engines so that you can bring more revenue into your business. Damon and his team are full of integrity, honesty, decency, and trust. And if that's important to you and that encourages you, I would encourage you to give them a call today at 855-736-6285 or go to SEOnational.com and get a free quote and tell them you heard about it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Get ready for a dynamite conversation coming up right now on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. If one intentional encourager was not enough, buckle up. There's a second one on the line here. He is the host of the Chit and podcast, and I love it. Fantastic guy. And you can connect with him on Facebook. More importantly, I would intentionally encourage you to listen to his podcast, and that's my buddy Jody Shuffield joining me on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Jody,
hello, sir. How are you? Good.
You know, if I was any better, as we say back in West Virginia, if I was any better, I'd have to be taken out and shot. So, you know, you put two and two together and figure that out for yourself. But Jody and I, see, the beautiful thing about a guy from Arkansas who lives in Washington State and a guy who grew up in Southern Ohio and married a West Virginia girl, there's not a lot of lost in translation here. We, you know, redneck and hillbilly dialects are real similar together.
Yep.
We now here, where I am in New York, I'm recording tonight in a little town called Garden City, New York. There's a bit of a language barrier between me and these people up here. So
I reckon you're right.
I reckon you're right too. So, hey Jody, I wanted to have you on because again, I've been admiring from afar what you've been doing with your podcast, and so I've got to go here for a second. The last couple of years have been really challenging for a lot of people, and everybody has tackled COVID differently and has had different obstacles and challenges and things like that. I got to ask you, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned the last couple of years around COVID that you'll carry after this thing is long gone?
Well, my job, I didn't lose a day of work. I worked for the government. I didn't lose a day of work. I teleworked briefly. I didn't like it. I like interacting with people. I'm a guy who's got to see people up front and say hi to them. And open phone conversations got old really quick. Emails got old really quick. I'm at the dining room table doing my work. My daughter's doing her schoolwork at the same table. And I just miss interaction with people. I'm a people guy. I love talking to people. And so that was something I missed dearly. Texting and calling was going to be rough. Even for our family who lives close by, my daughter was like, I need to connect with you as a family. So we did a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of Facebook time, and you miss that ability to do face-to-face conversations with friends and family. It got tough.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you this, you mentioned doing work, your daughter doing work at one end of the table and you were doing work at the other end of the table. We kind of faced that same situation in my family. And I was fortunate that I had a storage building that we had used, had carpet and everything in it. And I kind of turned that into an office so my son could have the house and I could have the outbuilding. But our problem was no internet. In West Virginia, the internet becomes an issue at times for people because, you know, hillbillies aren't good with technology. So, I mean, we were kind of limping along there through that. But I love what you said about needing to connect with people. When you think about having to connect interpersonally instead of, having to do it over a computer instead of, and we're connected over Zoom, and again, but everybody was working that way and doing everything that way. When you look back at that, what did it do for your people skills once you got back around people? Did you feel like your people skills were better during that time?
I wanted to hug and high five everybody. I'm a hugger. I'm a high fiver. I was handshake. I'm like, how are you? It's been forever. I'm like, my mindset going like, I probably should just, close high five or, visible hug. But, just being together, especially, church brothers or guys you hang out with, it's all, a lot of physical stuff, hugs or high fives, so that was kind of awkward to get back in the swing of things. And when's that norm to get back in the normal thing or to someone's boundaries. So that was kind of tough to really think about beforehand.
Well, and here's the thing too. A lot of people, in our church back home, we're a lot like that too. We're a hugging type church and things like that. And people there for a good while wondered, okay, is this proper? Is this a good thing to do? And Jody, I get the sense that I was hopeful, so hopeful, that we didn't lose the ability to love one another as Jesus talked about in the Bible. Mm-hmm. He talks about, you're my disciples if you love one another. And what's the best way to show love to somebody is, to your point, to high five them or things like that, to just say, hey, let me give you a hug and things like that. It's funny. I want to pivot here for just a minute if we can. When did encouragement become important to you? Because you just said it. You were talking about brothers and sisters in church and things like that. And I can take you to the moment for me when the Lord started calling me to the ministry of encouragement. But for you, when did the light bulb kind of go off for you that you wanted to do something around encouragement?
There was just so much negativity going on. Social media, the news, which I avoid like the plague. I hate watching the news. Even for 5 minutes, you get 18 stories, all deaths and murders and politics. It just got, you kind of weighed you down. Why can't we just be nice to each other and just encourage, share positivity and be kind? Novel concepts of being kind to one another. I was raised, yes, ma'am, no, sir, yes, ma'am. Get the door for someone. Doesn't matter what their age are or gender are. Open the door for somebody, and just kind of use things I learned as my dad and mom taught me. Be humble, be kind.
Well, see, now they got those contraptions where you stick your foot on them, and when you leave the bathroom, you stick your foot. I'm always afraid that I'm not nimble enough. I'm going to try to do that thing, and I'm going to break something. I'm either going to break the door or I'm going to break something on me. So yeah, but I love where you're taking us. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I love where you're taking us because we've lost it seems like, Jody, that we have lost simple human decency around things. Opening the door for a lady when, let ladies first. We got people that greet at our church and there would be some ladies and I'll be like, no. I know your job is to open the door for people, but if you're walking back in the door, I'm not going to let you open the door for me and walk ahead of me. You go ahead. And if I get in trouble, I don't think I'm going to get in trouble with my pastor because I would tell him the same thing. I'd be like, look, ladies first. I can't help it that she's a greeter. It's still a lady. But I didn't mean, you just brought something beautiful out there. There's encouragement in doing the simple things for people. Because people find that encouragement. When you think about, you talk about your mom and dad raising you the right way. How do we get our kids? I want to talk dad to dad here for just a second. How do we get our kids in that mode of thinking about other people first? Because you're right. All they see on social media is, look at me, look what I've done, look what I got, look where I've been, things like that. How do you think we get our kids back into that mode of preferring our brother first and foremost?
Number one is going to be lead by example. you only by example and you're rude to others and you curse at others, guess what? Your kids are going to do the exact same thing. I have 4 kids. My youngest is 18. My oldest is 27. And start early, and just teach them the best you can. Use your, love your wife. I've been married almost 29 years, and don't be shy to share your feelings or share your emotions. But I think your kids, there's a country song, the guy singing, and he said the cuss word, and his little boy in the back says the cuss word too. He's like, "Where'd you learn that song? That word?" He goes, "From you, Dad." He's like, "Oh, So thinking about that ahead of time, what we're saying and do, our kids will. And I have grandkids, so what I say and do, especially in front of a 4 and 6-year-old, has a very lasting impact on them.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. Prices are going up by the day. We've got to find ways to increase our household revenue. Now, a couple ways you could do that is, one, you could go and ask your boss for a raise. But if that doesn't work, I've got another way for you. It's my friend Joe Hart's program called Products for Profit. Joe's been a guest here on the Intentional Encourager podcast and told his story about how learning retail arbitrage changed his life, and he's been helping thousands of people change theirs. Now, retail arbitrage is simply this. It's taking a product and buying it and then reselling it online for a higher price, and you keep the profits. And guess what? Amazon and Walmart use third-party resellers every day to fulfill their customer orders. I want you to go to productsforprofit.com or productsforprofit.card.co. Get connected to Joe's team. Tell him you heard about it on the Intentional Encourager podcast and start making money today with Products for Profit. And now let's get back to more great conversation on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
You must have had kids when you were like 12 or something like that. Your wife must have been a young girl. No, it's funny. You took me back to a story I remember years ago. I met a gospel singer named Guy Penrod. He sang for a lot of years with the Gaither Vocal Band. And Guy Penrod he has 8 kids. And, he got teased all the time. And so after my first one was born, right after my wife had him in 2000, I went to the National Quartet Convention. I met Guy Penrod, and I said, "I'm a new dad. Got any advice for a new dad?" and he starts doing this. If you're watching on YouTube, he starts taking his fingers and goes, "Help your wife, help your wife, help your." At the time, he had like 5 or 6 kids, but he started going, "Help your wife, help your wife, help your wife, help your wife." And I've never forgotten that, Jody, because, again, a lot of times, and I saw this growing up, my dad would say to me, he'd be like, "Son," as he got older and more mature, my dad was a young dad himself, and he would be, had older brothers, he would want to go do stuff. And so my dad, when I was a little boy, probably 5 or 6 years old, my dad wasn't around a lot. My dad was home every night, but they were off doing things. And the older he got, he would tell me, he would say, "Son, I made mistakes. I wasn't mature when I was a young man, but I want to pass those things on to you." And I love what you said about helping your wife. There's real encouragement there in helping your wife and being a good spouse and things like that. How do you go about encouraging your wife and encouraging your kids? Because encouragement's near and dear to your heart as it is mine. So how do you encourage your wife and kids?
It's funny. We just bought this challenge adventure book about a month and a half ago, and I do a full-time job. She works the mall. I help her out. We're just constantly busy. We're like, we got to do something that we've been almost every place in this town. Something that's scratch off adventures, and one of them was you go buy a journal, and I buy a journal for myself, and she buys one for her, and she writes things about me, and I write things about her. Hey, honey, have a great day. You're amazing. I love you. Here's a Bible verse. And so we swap those out every day. And so it's been a pretty impactful last few weeks that, she writes down, "I love you for doing this." And I'm like, I didn't think about that. "I love you for doing that." Or I just write down little things about her. "What's your favorite movie? What's your favorite candy?" So in my head, I know there's little tidbits extra that I forgot, or, my brain has other things. So I'm trying to prioritize, God and using her little attributes and things as my little checklist for gifts or whatever down the road. So that's been really helpful the last several weeks. We're just so busy in life. It's nice to have that ability to sit down and go, oh yeah, I'm thankful for what she does. She does so many things. I just told her a few days ago, chauffeur, CEO, 18 different things. And how much you get paid for this? She goes, way too, you can afford me.
My wife would get me a journal and she'd write in like, "Don't be stupid." Turn your moron, turn the moron off or something like that, But no, you're exactly right. And here's what I was thinking of when you gave that answer, Jody. It was really cool the way you just kind of framed that up. You think when you get married, I've been married almost 26 years to the same woman. Okay, let's be perfectly clear. To my first wife, as I had a friend of mine who used to say.
Mm-hmm.
But when you married, you get married, you fall in love, and you're like, oh, we start planning out our life and things like that, and you don't realize the true partnership that marriage becomes.
Yep.
Because when you have kids, it's like, well, your wife didn't get pregnant by herself. That something had to happen. And so you're in that thing with her. Yeah, you're in that thing with her, and you go through those things in life. But I think I don't believe I fully realized it, and I get the sense you realized it probably a lot earlier than I did. But man, I needed my wife more than just for physical companionship and to be there when I got home and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I realized, man, my wife's a pretty smart girl. She sees some things I don't.
Oh yeah.
And she knows me well enough to point some of those things out. And so, if I would ask you this at this stage of your life, what's the encouragement you want to pass on to your grandkids?
It's a good one. Be kind. I mean, since we that's the thing. First we jump to is all the time is we want to get angry at someone offending us or someone says a cross word to us and we take it the wrong way. There's going to be mean people out there, but I think if we're kind and we love one another, and most importantly, my daughter does a great job of getting into church and Sunday school. And I never forget, someone asked my granddaughter, "Not going to heaven?" She goes, "I know Jesus, I'm going to heaven." And we did those outreach program years ago. My youngest was like 7 or 8. Some guy asked her, "You know about Jesus?" She goes, "Yeah, I know about Jesus." He's like 7 or 8 years old. I'm like, "Yeah." So teaching them early, I think, is the most critical, especially their Lord and Savior. And Jesus loves us, and we're going to make mistakes. We're flawed, and it's just going to and forgiveness is most important as well. So that's pretty critical, I believe, truly.
Well, here's the thing too. A lot of times, we want to make sure that our kids know. We want to make sure that they know educational things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Educational. For me, growing up in a house that my dad loved sports, I was a sports nerd. I was a stats nerd, so I would memorize statistics and things like that. But my parents also made sure that we knew when Sunday morning rolled around, it was time for Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
Sunday night rolled around, it was time for church. Wednesday night rolled around, it was time for church.
Yep.
And I love what you said there about instilling in your kids, and now it's moving through your grandkids. It's generational, Jody. This is what I think is so interesting. And I want to get your take on this as well. But here's where my thought goes to. In the Old Testament of the Bible, and for those of you that aren't Christians, just bear with me for a minute. I think you'll get the historical perspective as well. In the Old Testament, the Israelites were so intentional about legacy and recording things and passing down the oral history of those in the Bible that came before them. Moses may have been dead 200 years, but every little kid knew who Moses was and what he did and how he led the children of Israel to the promise. He didn't get them into the promised land, but he got them to it. And they were intentional about passing these legacies on and making sure that their children knew history and things like that. And I love where you went with that. How important is it for our kids and grandkids to know how to encourage other people?
I think it's pretty up there. I mean, my father-in-law just passed in December. I've known him for 28 years. Grandkids and great grandkids, and the story had a little celebration of life about him. And we had everyone sharing a story about Grandpa, and I'm like, in my head, this is a legacy. He has taught kids how to work on cars. He's taught them, woodworking or gardening and all these other things in my head. Building a lot of family builds, and so
allowing you to marry into his family.
It's funny. I asked my wife, did I ever ask your dad for a hand in marriage? She goes, no. I'm like,
hey, don't feel bad. I didn't do that either. I thought my wife was 26 when we got married. I thought she's old enough to make her own mind up whether she wants to marry me or not. And if she's dumb enough to say yes, what are you going to say?
Yeah.
But I thinking back, I should have asked that. But no, I was kidding, because you were rattling off some accomplishments, and I wanted to slide that in there. Like, well, the guy must have been a good guy. Let you marry into his family. So
it was an amazing guy. I think even the legacy, not how much I make, not how I rent a house. I haven't bought a house. It's not about material things. It's about how I live, my life, how I love my wife, how I love my kids. Those things that aren't material are in the brain and the heart are I believe, I could be wrong, are the most critical and most important for someone to carry on for year after year and legacy after legacy.
Tell me what made you decide to podcast, because I had people that ask me when I guest on other podcasts and things like that, and we're going to record an episode on your podcast, which I'm pretty pumped about doing. But what made you decide to podcast? Because, Jody, it seems like to me, one podcaster to another, it's like people, that's the cool thing to do now is just crank out a podcast. But I know you well. I know you pretty well. We've gotten to know each other the last little bit. You're not a guy that just enters into something willy-nilly like that. You're very thought-provoking. You like to take your time and really dive into it. So what made you decide to start the Chit and Chew podcast?
The Chit and Chat podcast was
Chit and Chat. Forgive me. Chit and Chew, I think, is a tobacco brand or something like that. Hey, listen, we might have just stumbled on a sponsorship for you or something like that.
Whatever works. The Chit and Chat podcast was a
I don't know why I said Chit and Chew. I am sitting here now going, how stupid are you, man? Not you, me. I'm talking about myself.
It's all good. And I was going to correct you eventually, so I was going to keep you going. But I want to do
you always let an idiot go as far as they want to go, because it ends up being kind of entertaining, That's why most stupid things happen to West Virginia people, because people just say, well, we'll just let them go. Something funny's about to happen here. So,
but yeah, it was a coffee shop idea I had. I wanted a coffee shop that's not Starbucks. Sorry, not the S company name. I wanted something small and convenient, just coffee and danishes and pastries. It takes money for that. Didn't have it. So about 6 months ago, I pondered the idea and going, what if I bring this? And I dabbled with it a little bit. I love Reader's Digest, little snippets of stories. I started doing that a little bit. I'm like, what if I talk to people and get their story? Because everyone has a story of encouragement, of where they've been, where their trials and tribulations they face. So I began to reach out to comedians, musicians, nonprofit veterans, and really get their story on how they got to where they got, who encouraged them, who inspired them. And life gets tough. Do they want to quit? So I really want to reach out to individuals and say, who encouraged you? And because I love their story. I love, Ken Davis on. I have Shane Lakita on today. He's on TikTok, 92,000 followers. he is an ambassador of kindness. He is always sharing kindness and encouragement. And but when you talk to people on a podcast, 50 minutes, it seems like 5 because they go by so fast.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing talking to people. And I love interacting with people and getting their story.
You know, it's funny because people have asked me, they say, why do you continue to podcast? And I say, it's because of the cool people you meet having a podcast. You know, I've gotten, like you, I've gotten to interview some cool people that have become my friends. And it's great because it's a medium where, and Jody, I'm sure this has happened for you on your podcast, but that moment that I love the most is where people say, you know what, I've never told this before. I've never really talked about this. Mm-hmm. And they share something deep and powerful and personal with you and your audience. You're like, man, that's really cool. Have you had one of those moments yet where you had one of your guests just open up to you like that? And, you know, take me through the moment you felt when that happened to you for the first time.
Well, each week I do a kind of I dive into someone's life. I watch their videos or podcasts and really get to know them before I even talk to them. And one of the guys I had on, Bob Smiley, a comedian, had a divorce. And I'm like, I don't want to bring it up in our conversation. I just feel that it was kind of not right. And he shared about that during our conversation and the struggles him and his kids went through. And I'm like, didn't see that one coming. My notes were like, that wasn't in my notes. And that's why I let him share his story about how that impacted him and what he did and his boys did. And so that was really inspiring to me that they brought that subject out to help others. And sometimes divorce he was telling me divorce is taboo. You don't want to tell anybody, you know, and so his best friend didn't even know at the time. And so that was kind of shocking for me that he did that, but it was nice to get someone to share, you know, that heartbreaking story and then moving forward in their life.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. You know, dreams are powerful pieces of intentional encouragement. We all have them. If you're a business owner, you've probably always dreamed of taking your sales to levels you've never seen before. I've got a guy that can help you with that. His name is Brad Norwood. My good buddy Brad has been on the Intentional Encourager podcast as a guest before, and he is a dream specialist. His company, Dream It Pro, offers incentive packages to travel to places such as the Masters, Kentucky Derby, the Super Bowl, even exotic places that you've always wanted to take your team, but you just didn't know how to do it. Brad's your guy. And oh, by the way, Brad's a certified bucket list coach, so he can help your team members achieve their personal dreams as well. I want you to go to www.dreamitpro.com and find out more, or call him directly at 479-466-6907. And by the way, tell him you heard it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Well, and and I know who Bob Smiley is, and man, kudos to you for getting big time guests like that. I mean, Bob Smiley's pretty popular in the Christian, especially in the Christian community. He's very popular, and so is Ken Davis and Kerry Pomeroli, who you've had on. And you know, Bob Smiley, if you listen to him for 5 minutes, he's as talented and as funny as anybody out there that you'll hear, and he's just a high energy guy. And here he sits down with you and he goes, man, what really rocked me was the fact I went through a divorce. You know, Jody, that's incredible. Have you got somebody on your bucket list? Because, you know, every podcaster that does what we do, we have a bucket list, you know, people we'd like to talk to. Right. Mine for a few years ago was Phil Robertson. I've had the opportunity to interview Phil, and you can go back and see that on the Intentional Encourager podcast, but take me through a couple of guys you'd like to sit down with. You know, maybe they'll listen. Maybe they'll go, hey, Jody, heard you say that. You know, who knows? But who are some folks you'd like to sit down with and have a conversation with?
Probably some Christian or country artists to really pick their brain on what really encouraged them to get to where they were at. How many times they fall down? How many times I've seen a lot of videos of guys. For example, Stephen Curtis Chapman, where they his son ran over their daughter in a driveway years ago. And so I'm like, whew, I'm a father. How would that impact me? But they continued in ministry, and God's watched over them and blessed their family. And so I just getting their story of musicians of what they want to quit, or what really pushed them into ministry to keep going. I think that's really, I think music these days, especially Christian music, is like many sermons you hear. They're so powerful, and they're straight out of the Bible most of the times, and I like God speaking to you in a lot of these songs. So that'd be kind of, I'm not sure who, Casting Crowns, Third Day, but I think this in general, this Christian comedians, artists, anyone really, to share their story.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. Like I'm a big fan of. I grew up on Southern Gospel quartets, and I love Southern Gospel quartets. But I really like Bart. I really like Bart Millard from Mercy Me. I'd like to sit down with Bart Millard.
Amazing story.
Yeah, I can only imagine the very popular story. And again, Jody, the cool thing about it is now with social media, the world is a lot smaller, and you can reach out to some of those people directly and things like that. And for podcasters, I mean, I've reached out to people I've wanted to talk to, and it's crickets, and it's like, okay, swing and a miss. Let's step in there again and try it. But, the line that I'm thinking about is that line from The Office where Michael Scott says, you miss 1,000% of the shots you don't take. Wayne Gretzky, and then underneath puts Michael Scott. I'm thinking to myself, you miss those shots, but
there's something like Kenny Rogers where the little boy's out playing baseball, and he throws the ball up and misses. Strike one, strike two, strike three. He goes, man, I'm the greatest pitcher ever. He reversed that mentality of striking out to, I'm a good pitcher.
Oh man, listen, I hit a ton of home runs off myself in the backyard doing that very same thing growing up, it was on. But I'll tell you this, Jody, what have you learned? Let's go here for just a quick second, and we'll get into your story. We'll have you back and we'll get into your story. I'm curious about what is it that you've learned about yourself podcasting that you thought, man, I didn't realize that I did this or I did that. But is there something that you've learned about yourself podcasting?
Takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of. I could go in. I like being prepared, and I like having some kind of outline, some kind of questions, and lined up. So I think the more I'm getting familiar with it, I can kind of outline instead of doing 5 pages of notes and just little bullets. It's like preaching a sermon when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Fifth Sunday youth group, we preach Sunday, sermons. And so doing bullets instead of a book, and kind of using my just heart and instead of a script. And that's why I asked you about that a while back, going, you take a lot of questions and notes, and you would, let's swing for it, And
Phil Robertson taught me that. I will say this. I was doing a live radio interview with Phil Robertson. We recorded it to play on a morning talk show that I was guest hosting on. I had 13 questions written down to ask Phil and ask him 4 in an hour conversation. and I learned right then and there that the best questions for me come in the moment. Like you were just talking about, like I had, you're talking about Bob Smiley, and I'm like, man, that's really good. I think you always learn something, Jody. So here's what I would say. What have you learned about encouragement since you've begun to podcast? Because you talked earlier about, man, loving people and wanting to connect with people, and you're a high five and a hugger kind of guy, and I'm right there with you. But what have you learned about encouragement now that you've got a podcast about encouragement?
I'll use the beginning word of this interview of the COVID time. I think encouragement is contagious. We can make it contagious and sharing it and spreading it to our towns, our communities, our family. And when we're spreading encouragement to one another, and we can make a powerful change, impact all over our towns and our country. just sharing positivity and sharing kindness. And so I think encouragement is and can be contagious in a very, very positive way.
So share with my audience your biggest piece of intentional encouragement. What has been the one thing that has kept you encouraged, that you would share with somebody else?
Don't be afraid to step out of the box. And I could walk in a room and say hi to 5 people and make a friend with 2 or 3. I know some cannot do that. I'm not afraid to get embarrassed. I'm not afraid to someone laugh at me. I'm 51 years old. I'm goofy. I'm weird. It's fine. God made me in a very unique way. Sometimes my wife rolls her eyes at me. But I do weird things, but I love people. I love sharing encouragement. Don't be afraid to step out of your box, to do whatever you want to do. Podcast, fly, bike, run, marathons, whatever. And I think when you want to put God in the box, that box gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Don't be afraid to step out of that box and let God do wonderful things in your life.
Yeah, that's such good encouragement. And I'll be 50 in August, so you and I are around the same age. And again, it's amazing how that you see so many people, and we've been there at times ourselves where we're like, man, I'm afraid to do this or do that. And, it's amazing what happens when you step out. Tell folks where they can find your podcast, how they can connect with you. Tell folks how they can get to your resources and things. They want to get more encouragement. Besides getting in the Intentional Encourager podcast, how can they get to you?
Chit Chat Podcast, Encouraging One Another, is on Anchor, Spotify, most podcasting platforms. It's on my Facebook page. I put links on there on Jody Shuffield, and I just I shared on TikTok and Twitter, and I'm just copy. I'm in different groups on the podcast on Facebook, so I just share it, and I'm happy for anyone to listen to, subscribe, ask me a question, tell me I'm doing great or not, comment. I want to learn from each episode I do, whether it's my voice sucks or that was a very good topic you talked about. So I want to learn each and every time I do a podcast and experience the highs and lows, and just and my goal, encourage one person an episode and share some wisdom, make some waves in some water, and for everyone to share encouragement.
Well, it's not the Chit and Chew podcast, as I incredibly dumbly said. It's the Chit and Chat podcast.
Yep. What you do with coffee? A Chit and Chat.
Chit and Chat. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, some people don't know what chit is, but your Arkansas is coming out in you when you say that. So
a little bit.
Your Arkansas native is coming out in you. Jody Shuffield, man, what a pleasure it's been to have you today. So enjoyed our conversation and appreciate you being on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Continue blessings for you and your family as you share and make intentional encouragement contagious in your neck of the woods as well.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And of course, the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through his word. If you're not subscribed to the Intentional Encourager podcast, hit the subscribe button wherever you get podcasts so you don't miss an exciting episode where you can get encouraged and stay encouraged. And remember, anyone, anywhere, at any time, any place can be an intentional encourager.